I'm here with Scott at Hi-Rez. Scott, you work on Smite, and you do a lot of balancing with characters, all the gods in the game. Can you just kind of give me an overview, game design-wise, of all of the stuff that goes into balancing 60 plus gods for like a really, really complex game like Smite is?
Yeah, we sort of have three main pillars to our balance process. The first is community feedback, which is very important to us. And we have community managers and also esport managers. Our most frequent meetings per week are actually with those guys who are giving us feedback from the players, feedback from the general community on what their top concerns are. Because it's very important to us that we understand what the community is worried about or what things that maybe aren't meshing well with them. And then the second pillar we have is really statistics. And we track pretty much everything that happens in game. Not just the win rate on gods, but how gods are performing for the number of kills they have, the amount of damage they do. And we look as wide as kind of the entire broad general player population, and as narrow as even what are the top 10 players in the world doing with this character. And then the third pillar we have for balance is kind of where we want to take the meta in the future, so that when we make balance changes and adjustments, we kind of do it with the thought in mind of how we want the game to play throughout the course of the year. And when all three of those things line up on an issue, when the community doesn't like something, the stats show it's bad, and it's not where we want to go in the future, it's a very easy balance change to make. When they don't line up,
I'm guessing it's not always like that.
Yeah, it's usually not like that, and that's where a lot of the more discussion comes in, a lot of the time comes in of trying to work between balanced decisions on things where maybe the community doesn't like one thing, but the stats are showing something else.
Yeah, I want to dive into each of those pillars, but first,
Sure.
how do you take the information from those three things? So you have for community, you have probably Reddit is a big source. You have your own forums. How do you take that information and compare it to your statistical information and compare it to your analysts, and how do you make a decision based on all of those? Like, those are very different things when one person says Scylla's OP and your stats show something totally different. How do you rectify all that?
That's right. With the community, obviously we look at the forums. We do different community moderation around that. But we also do surveys. There's a good number of surveys we do for the casual players and for the pro players. And then specifically for the more professional esports side of things, we have a lot of one-on-one talks with the pro players around issues they're having as well. And that's really how we gather that information from that pillar. From the statistics, obviously we do that tracking internally with a lot of different metrics that we gather from pretty much every game that's been ever played in Smite. In terms of how we rectify the two together, it's really kind of a case-by-case basis, and it just requires a lot of looking at what the issue is. And one example I can actually give that's relevant to the World Championship is Ares. For actually a long time earlier in this year, players really wanted to see a buff to Ares.
So for people who didn't see the tournament, Ares was kind of considered low tier, and then Titan, this European team that plays kind of on a different meta than the American team, they came in and totally changed, turned the game around by playing Ares twice. The other team kind of didn't know what to do about it, right?
Yeah, he was a key kind of pillar to their games, and we saw in the statistics that Ares was very, very strong, even among casual players, even among pro players. So that was one of those where we got the feedback people wanted to buff, but we thought that he certainly had the potential of dropping into the meta and actually being very strong. It's just the way players were playing at the time with their teams didn't really fit for him. But obviously, as we saw in the World Championship, he could be extremely effective. So that's a case where we looked at that one and said, okay, we're going to kind of go on the side of our statistics because we think that he actually can perform. Now, there's been plenty of cases that go the other way, where we see that players are having a problem, and sometimes it's not just a balance problem, but they're not enjoying something. And so it's really important to not just use statistics, because statistics can say what's happening, but not really the feeling the players are getting. So we've made changes to characters, like when we redid Arachne, which she was performing well, but players that didn't like her were really saying that they weren't having fun with the design in the kit. So we had to look at that and kind of go back and say, okay, we need to make changes here, less for balance, more for enjoyment.
I've talked a little bit about the statistic stuff before with other people at Hi-Rez. Is there some interesting stuff you can show us talking about other stuff you track, like maybe how often one god is on a winning team versus a losing team, just charts and graphs, stuff like that, that would give people an idea of really how much stuff you track in the game, because like you said, it's kind of everything.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. I do have a couple charts up right now. Actually, this chart we're looking at right here is how often a god is selected and picked. And this red chart we see here is actually Apollo. And Apollo's actually, he's been slowly trending up since we did World Championships, since he was picked a good bit there. But the high spikes here are actually where Apollo's on the free god rotation. Okay. So whenever we put god on free god rotation, it ends up being picked a lot, of course, since more players have access to it. This is kind of a really broad view that we use just to take an initial look at things. Along this track, we have kind of general win rate, Up here is kind of average deaths versus kills. This is kind of just an initial first view. We go much deeper than this, but it's kind of a dashboard we have just for looking at general issues that might be out there. And one of the fun ones on here is that Thanatos, on average, and this is all level 30 players, so pretty big view. On average, Thanatos gets the most kills in a match, but on average, he also has the most deaths in a match.
Which, for me, having played Thanatos, I kind of get, because a lot of times I'm diving in to get that kill, you don't make it out.
That's right, and you want that kill so bad, you just can't resist it. It's just worth it to you to get. Now, all these stats change if we go from looking at 30 players to looking at top MMR rated 30 players. They play a lot differently, they pick a lot differently. So depending on the group you're looking at, stats can change a lot. And that's also another thing that has to be debated about and talked about when we balance a god, is we might have a god that's doing very well in casuals, but maybe can't be seated very well competitively, or vice versa.
For pretty much any competitive video game, you're going to have balancing issues with your different characters or classes or whatever. One thing that I think is kind of unique to MOBAs as they've gotten really big and have become kind of the de facto esport is you have to not only balance all the gods in the game, but you also have to consider how people are playing those gods at a really high level, the competitive people competing for $1 million versus someone who starts out at level 1, first game, what their experience is and how that god plays for them. How do you have both of those things work in the same game when these people can be playing a god completely differently?
For Smite, we're definitely balancing kind of from the top down first. So we are balancing for esports and for it to be a competitive game.
Okay.
So from that sense, that's kind of the most important feature. But that doesn't mean that we don't have some gods that are intentionally really good for casuals and are not right now, maybe great competitive picks. So I think Hades is a really good example of that. Hades is a very easy god for new players to play. He's also a very popular character that they kind of know. And he does actually exceptionally well in casuals, especially low-level casuals. He's a god that right now is not a competitive pick for a number of different reasons. And for him, right now with the current meta, we're okay with that, right? Because he's not hurting the competitive guys and he's playing very well for our casual population. Now, vice versa, that's not necessarily true. If we have a god that is causing issues with competition or esports, that's a god that we want to balance very quickly and make sure that it's in proper alignment.
Gotcha. Do you track stuff with items as well, and how does that affect the balance of the gods? And because obviously gods going to perform totally differently based on what items they have.
No, a lot. We earlier this season we nerfed an item called Chin Size that was making several gods very strong. And the adjustment to that item was actually the way we chose to bring those gods sort of into alignment, since they were all kind of using it. So itemization is definitely very heavily influences the balance of the gods. Yeah.
So to wrap this up, can you tell me a little bit about? Let's talk about the last pillar, the meta stuff. Talk a little bit about kind of what you guys have been doing to get the meta to the point it is now in terms of balance changes, and maybe what you're going to be doing, going forward.
Yeah. In season 1, we did a lot of kind of individual god balancing, really looking at kind of the outliers and getting them into alignment in terms of performance. And we also put a lot of focus into the classes to make sure each individual class was very strong. For example, we did a very big shift on warriors in the middle of season 1 because the warriors were kind of overperforming in all roles.
Were they too tanky, too high damage?
They pretty much just had too much of everything going on. Their basic attacks were all too strong. They were able just to fill up too many different roles kind of on the battlefield. So we made an adjustment there just to bring them into kind of better alignment so that Guardians could come back out and be strong again. So there's definitely a lot of counter picks right now in Smite. But for a lot of characters, the counterpicking is actually very kind of small percentages of differences. And we want to expand that and make that a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. So that when you see a team composition come together, there's kind of more counters and more different options players might do during the process of picking and banning.
Interesting. So right now, if someone picked Scylla, there might be a very specific counter to that, but you're hoping in season 2 there might be 5 really good counters to that.
That's right. That's right. Or different ways to counter specific team compositions.
Great. And you guys put patches out every 2 or 3 weeks, something like that?
That's right. Yeah.
Cool. All right, Scott. Thanks for talking to us.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.